let's get into the fun stories from the week. So first up, we've got Sony at CES. They had some um, cool things that they showed off. Specifically, I would say this was the coolest part was the new electric car that they were working with Honda now. Although it did look pretty slick. No, the Project Leonardo, which is their new accessibility controller kit for PS5. Um, I think uh, a lot of credit needs to go to Xbox for their accessibility controller that they had made. Because without, one taking the leap, you just don't know if the other would, right? And so I think it was one of those things that like once they did it, like Sony kind of like had to do something, right? And like as a whole for games, for the community, for people in general, like this is a huge win. So I thought that was really, really cool to see them announce it. There's really no details like beyond them just like kind of announcing it. But I that was the main thing that I saw that I was very much one like just surprised and two thought was just really cool.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too. Um, I don't want to be too negative about it because like about Sony's announcement of this, not of the product. But like there's just a part of me that like back when Microsoft announced their accessible controller, Jack Ryan was just like, for fuck's sake.
Right.
Um, but and I say that because it seems like they really thought this through, and they worked with Able Gamers and, a couple other organizations. I think Stack Up was one. Um, but, I mean, I know Spawn was tweeting about it after it came out because, of course, everybody was tweeting at him when it was announced, and he does I don't know if he's, like, a founder of Able Gamers, but he's very heavily involved with it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was apparently on the design team, on the test team, that kind of stuff. Um, so it was cool to see Sony go out and interact with these different organizations to see like what is actually going to work. Because Sony could design stuff all day, but if you don't have that experience of needing some sort of um, altercation to a controller to play a game, then how are you supposed to know what's needed?
Right.
Um, Really cool. Um, I'm excited for that to come out. I saw a lot of people online make some good points that were like, good. Now, each of these companies has accessible controllers out that both have, you know, good things about them.
Mm-hmm.
Unlock them so they can be used on either platform.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, or hopefully at the very least, if my hope is that Xbox was first to like market with it, right? My hope is that Sony's, takes was able to learn from Xboxes and is more innovative, better, buzzwords. Xbox then can in turn think about how to retool, how to make it better. But at the end of the day, I mean, unlocking it is would be best because obviously everybody's going to have their own, preferences or, what's like comfortable. Just like uh, you know, the dual sense versus the Series X controller,
Yeah, and
So
it it seems, I don't know, without having seen a whole lot about the PlayStation 1, I mean, it seems like the Xbox One is a little more open to what you can, like, plug into it, And kind of the example in my head is like somebody who's in a wheelchair. And I don't know if you've seen like anybody's setups with these things, but there are some pretty cool ones where they integrate it straight into their wheelchair. I mean, the accessible controller for Xbox has like specific hardware to mount to like a standard mount for a wheelchair. I don't know the details of it, but um it seems to me like that would be better in that kind of situation. And again, not going to sit here and pretend like I know what would be better, but just from an observation, than
Mm-hmm.
like the PlayStation one, because the PlayStation one seems like it just had to be like put on some sort of platform, like a table or something.
Right.
Um, so that's why I mean I think that would be good. Um, it seems like the PlayStation one is more like ready to customize out of the box for
Mm-hmm.
certain people. Like there's obviously more buttons there. The Xbox One, I think, is basically just like a D-pad and like two larger buttons, and then you can of course plug in whatever peripherals you need. So again, I mean, it would just give more people more options. If you don't need this big intricate setup and you just need a controller that you can customize kind of just in one package, then the PlayStation One's probably a lot better than having to have to get the Xbox One, get all the peripherals, and try to put that together somehow.
Right.
But from like what I could see, I don't know how you could use the PlayStation One in like a wheelchair setup.
Right. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Regardless,
I
still
thought
really
that was
cool.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be like too surprised like in retrospect because Sony's worked a ton with a ton of different groups in getting accessibility features really upped. I mean, I think that's when you actually think about it, why The Last of Us Part One is such like an important remake in a lot of ways, because the accessibility features that were there for Last of Us Part Two were certainly not there when the original Last of Us released. So you're missing out on like you're basically gatekeeping so many people from being able to experience that first story themselves.
Mhm.
So I think like that shows, and then just again in all of the games that have been releasing here of late, just a ton of like, yeah, I mean, I forget how many different features there were for God of War, but uh Steve Sailor, I think is, if I'm remembering correctly, the blind gamer. Um he I remember he posted like a whole video like going over like in gruesome detail like all of the grueling intense detail.
See, I
um,
don't correct you, idiot.
um, and so it's already something that they've been like focusing a lot on. But yeah, I just color me shocked. I was not expecting a controller to be revealed. Um, I also talked about some other stuff. They talked about this was actually kind of surprising. Jim Ryan announced that PlayStation 5 has passed 30 million units sold. Not something that I would have thought they would have gotten into, especially given
Mhm.
the whole arguments about
They
why
suck.
yeah, exactly, why Call of Duty, or why Microsoft shouldn't get Call of Duty. I'm not even going to talk about why Microsoft shouldn't get Activision Blizzard because, again, like we discussed last week, that's not the argument anymore. The argument is simply about Call of Duty, regardless of whatever anybody wants you to believe. Um, so I thought that was a bit surprising. They also went into PSVR 2. I couldn't remember if they had announced this already, but 30 titles are going to be available for PSVR 2 day
What?
one.
Okay. I have What does that mean?
Yeah. So I was going to ask you that too. Does that mean like, uh, help me out here, like Job Simulator, right?
Yeah,
Like, okay, but that was on PSVR, or are these
right.
strictly like new titles that are like coming to PSVR 2. I think there's overlap. I think there are games that were on the PSVR that are also getting like a PSVR 2, because that was like a whole thing that we talked about where like games are not going to be PSVR games are not going to be compatible with PSVR 2, right?
Correct.
So then it's going to beg the question of, okay, like whatever, you can, you know, again, I don't know how to make a console, so I'm just going to trust that there's some impossibility to getting every single game just bare bones playable at the very least on PSVR 2. But it'll be interesting to see how they handle the games, like No Man's Sky, right? Like, does No Man's Sky have a separate standalone for VR? Or is it just the game and you can like it has like VR capabilities if you like plug in the VR? Do you know how those work?
I'm sorry. Like with No Man's Sky. So the disc that I bought when that game came out, before PSVR was even a twinkle in Jim Ryan's eye, um, I can use that disc and play it in VR.
Okay.
But, you know, can I take my PS4, and I'm taking PSVR out of the equation for this question. Can I play my PS4 No Man's Sky disc on a PS5 and have it be like the PS5 upgraded version?
Right. That's what's going to be curious is
Right.
if it's just a seamless, yeah, plug and play, or is there going to be a $10 unlock fee, or are you just going to have to flat out buy the game
The amount I wish you
again?
and I could have like watched this live together because the amount of shit I said under my breath during this whole thing. Um, yeah, they were. I want to go back to them touting 30 games at launch. Like, of course, some of that I think like whatever the Horizon
Yeah.
Zero
Call
Dawn game is.
Call of the Mountain. Yeah.
Yeah, like obviously that's one. Okay, they specifically were touting Beat Saber uh, for PSVR 2, and they said yes, this will be there. But yeah, how many of those 30 games? Because I probably have at least 30 games for PSVR, the original. Like, how many of those games are going to be on PSVR 2, and how many of them am I going to have to pay for a second time? The answer is
Right.
zero because fuck the PSVR 2. But I say that, and we'll check in a year from now.
Marking it on my calendar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I don't want to buy Beat Saber again. And Justine was there. Justine was sitting with me at that point, and I was like, "We've got like every music pack for Beat Saber." So not only did we buy the game, we probably have $100 into that
You
game.
funded Beat Saber 2 all by yourselves.
Yes, and now I won't even won't even get it because it won't be a Beat Saber 2. I mean, it'll just be like I don't know if live service is the right word, but they'll keep releasing new packs.
Yeah. No, I know. It. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't like really looked a ton to try and find like a comprehensive 30, like find a comprehensive list of the 30. Um, Long story short, our answer is that on February 22nd, we'll find out what the upgrade path looks like. Um, Free, small fee, full price. Those are the only options. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, um, it will be interesting.
And it's funny to bring up again, friend of the show, London. He actually he texted me, I want to say the day after CES, and told me to tell him not to pre-order the PSVR 2. And I said it is tough, though. I mean, the way he's looking at it is that like, so he and you are obviously in two very different I can understand why you are a flat out no, because for you to get it, you also need to get a PS5.
Mhm.
That's a very like high price to pay. 100% like understand. Um, but he was pointing out like he does already have a PS5, so he was like playing the game of like it's not like as much like all at once, and it's like yeah, that makes it tough. I
If
Go ahead.
if I had bought the PS5 at launch, I would be pre-ordering the PSVR 2.
Right.
I think it's going to be really good. You know, despite everything I say, I think it's going to be probably the best VR platform out in terms of, they talked a lot about live service stuff with VR
Hmm.
at CES, sporting events, metaverse, if you want to call it that. Um, and then, on top of that, you have the games. Uh, so yeah, I think if I had had a PS5 for 2 going on 3 years, absolutely no brainer, would pre-order it.
Yeah. I personally, the boat that I'm in is that I feel like I'm still too close to the PS5 coming out. I'm so too close to that purchase that I want to give it a year, make sure I see enough games come out that I'm like, I can check a list and say, yep, I'll check it twice. And then, you know, decide from there. And then at that point, like make the decision. And hopefully at that point, maybe I can pick one up at a somewhat discounted price. But
Mhm.
if not, it's easier to swallow at that point after, I've distanced myself from the PS5, but I don't want to distance myself too far because, you know, when the PS6 inevitably comes out, my PSVR may be, null and void at that point. Or,
Or you
well,
get
you
into the
can still
loop
use
of
it, but you can't, PSVR 3 is coming out and, it's dead in the water.
right, or is Sony gonna do the same shit where they did last generation where they come out with a pro version
Right.
and VR is better?
Right. So, we'll see. Last thing from Sony at CES, game adjacent. They gave a sneak peek for the Gran Turismo movie, and it's a bit much. All of these Sony properties getting like movies, shows, and stuff like that. But I have to be honest, I'm really excited. I'm really excited that like they're all in on it. Would love to see. I know Xbox did Halo, obviously. But would just love to see like, you know what? Let's go for it. It's been long enough that we've like distanced ourselves from some bad video game adaptations. Let's see what we can make happen. And I think like overall, I want to say most recent adaptations have been received really well. It'll be interesting to see how The Last of Us goes. That comes out in, as of recording, I think less than a week. Um, we'll see how that is. We obviously know how like Uncharted was, so that's like your live action. Then you get like the Mario, and then you also get these animes that have been like really really like well touted. So it seems like the right time to like really go for it, and I'm here for it. I'm excited. Uh, I will say though, a Gran Turismo movie, I don't really understand what the underlying story of Gran Turismo is, so you know. I think this is one for my dad. Put it that way.
I don't know that there really is an underlying story in Gran
Right.
Turismo, like, I think it's just a racing sim.
No, I know. So I'm like, what's the like? What's the movie?
It's apparently a kid who is a Gran Turismo player who then goes on to become an actual racer,
Perfect.
and apparently it's based on a true story.
Perfect. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting.
Uh, yeah. I mean, I don't know. What do you think of like all these adaptations we're getting?
I actually saw a really good interaction on Twitter. Not good, like wholesome, because it's still
It's
Twitter,
Twitter.
but yeah. But about The Last of Us HBO, and some people were like, "Why couldn't you do an original story?" Or like, "Will you ever do an original story?" And I don't remember if it was Neil Druckmann or
I think
somebody
it
else
was.
from. Was it?
Yeah.
So they were like, "Well, we're just trying to like the story is already good. We are trying to get it into more people's eyeballs."
Yeah. Yeah, no
Um,
joke. Shelby and I had a game night with a couple of my coworkers, or well, it was my coworker and her husband, and um, we got talking about like shows and stuff, and no joke, the husband says to me, he goes, "Oh, did you see that new HBO show that's coming out? It's like apocalyptic," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Yeah, he's like, it's called The Last of Us," and I was like, "Oh yeah," I was like, "It looks sick." I was like, "It's literally my favorite video game. Like it's based on my favorite video game." And he had no idea. Never knew that it was a video game or anything like that.
that's crazy.
Yeah, and I was just like, yeah, so like that's perfect. There's so many people like it's so when you are always surrounded by gaming, it's so easy to think that like this is dumb, this is pointless. But like what the Last of Us series as a whole across the three games have sold 30 million?
3 games?
Yeah, Last of Us four, I guess, with the remastered.
Oh, are you counting all the remakes and
Yeah, I
remasters
think
and stuff?
I think it's across all iterations of The Last of Us, I think as a whole, so four games, I think have sold like 30 million or something like that. I think it just crossed that threshold, or is closing in on it or something. Like that's not like I'll say that's not like amazing, right? I mean, and this is like highly touted as like one of the best stories in games, right? Like
Mhm.
so many people say that like it's unmatched, whether it's the first one, whether it's the second one. People have their gripes and everything like that. Um, but again, like that's people who had hands on and played it. Um, and then yeah, there's just so many people who like have no clue. So if anything, I think like I'm a little nervous, not gonna lie, that the show could end up being better than the game.
In what regard?
Like just like overall like dialogue and like stuff that like the interactions of the characters that can actually happen on screen that like maybe were difficult to have happen in game. And also I think like parts of storylines might be able to be like get a little more fleshed out and a little more like you might be able to get a little more out of like certain scenes with it being like real.
Mhm.
um and it'll just be interesting. But I wondered if they were gonna like deviate from the story, and I think like again, I think there's gonna be like some things that they can do, but the fact that they like no, like we know how season one, or I'm assuming season one's gonna be the entire first game. I could be wrong about that, but like if it is, we know how season one's going to end, and I'm totally on board with that. So, but I'm truly very interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is gonna be kind of a groundbreaking event, I guess I'll call it, for adaptations.
Yeah, again, I think like hopefully it's received really well, and then hopefully it drives you know more IPs to kind of like make that jump. I mean, I'm totally down with it just being a faithful retelling. I'm totally down with it just using the world simply, whatever. But
I think it already has like, I think critics could post reviews starting today.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I would tell you. There we go. I thought I started seeing like that Rotten Tomatoes could start posting. Yeah. Right now, it's sitting at a 96%.
That's nuts.
I forget what I saw earlier, but yeah, it is very, very well reviewed so far.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, I'm looking
It was
forward to
up
it.
to 29 critics at one point and still at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's nuts.
Now it's at 56 and it's only down to 96%.
That's awesome. Yeah, and also actually in some other Last of Us news, uh Druckmann was also itching that scratch
Yeah, it was.
for the rumors of potentially a Last of Us 3. So um I think I saw one thing that was saying that like it was being developed, and then but his most recent thing didn't confirm that, but he did say that like there's definitely more story. He feels like there's more story to be told, or that can be told. So, man, leave it or continue it. Either way, I'll be happy. But I would totally be down with getting some more Last of Us. Truly, just
Oh
love
yeah.
those games so freaking much.